They gave my childhood home to my cousin, so I gave them a reason to regret it. They always told me not to be dramatic. "You're just sensitive," my mother would sigh, whenever I cried about something she didn't consider important. My dad was quieter. He never corrected her, never stepped in. He just looked at me with that expressionless face, like he was watching the weather forecast. I learned to stop expecting lightning bolts of empathy from either of them. But there was one thing I always thought they'd never take from me: the house. Our house wasn't fancy, not like the ones in the gated communities 2 neighborhoods over. It was a modest 3-bedroom, slightly tilted on one side due to the shifting earth beneath. The walls carried the smell of cedar and old winters. The wooden floors creaked in familiar ways, like a language I knew without having to think. My room faced the east, so I'd wake up with the sun hitting the cracked lavender paint on my walls. My dad helped me paint them when I was 9. He spilled some on the carpet and laughed. I remember that laugh. I didn't hear it very often. I grew up in that house. Had my first panic attack in the hallway when I was 13. Snuck in my first failed crush at 16. Hid in the garage after I didn't get into my dream college. Every crack in the walls told a story of mine. So, when my parents told me they'd given it to my cousin Rachel, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a betrayal. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got there. I'm an only child. You'd think that would mean I was spoiled, or at least got undivided attention. But no, my parents just poured all their attention into themselves, and then whatever was left, they gave to Rachel. Rachel is my aunt's daughter. She's 3 years younger than me, bubbly, pretty, always promising, and smart in that effortless way people love to describe someone who hasn't had to try hard yet. Her parents, my Aunt Sheila and Uncle Dave, weren't around much. They were one of those couples that loved the idea of parenting more than the act of it. My mom stepped in like a martyr. Rachel is practically my second daughter, she'd tell everyone. She said it with pride, but the way she'd look at me afterward, it wasn't pride I saw. It was comparison. Rachel spent summers at our house. Eventually, it became school holidays too. Then she just moved in during her sophomore year of high school when Aunt Sheila relocated for work. The transition was so seamless, it almost felt strategic. My room was still mine, but my home? It wasn't mine anymore. It was our home, but mostly hers. My parents cheered louder at her dance recitals than they ever did at my academic awards. They bought her the clothes I begged for in middle school. They gave her a car at 17. I got a used bike. I should have said something. I know that now. But when you grow up being told to not make things harder than they already are, you start to believe your silence is noble, necessary, even. I moved out at 19, not for college, but because I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I worked 2 jobs, moved into a studio the size of a closet, and started building a life out of leftover parts. I didn't have time for bitterness. Not then. Rent was high, and my heart was tired. I didn't visit home much. And when I did, Rachel was always there, like a portrait that never came off the wall. She got into a fancy art school, and my parents paid for it, because Sheila couldn't afford it. When I asked if they could help me with my HVAC certification, my mom blinked like I'd asked her for a kidney. "You're already working, aren't you?" she said. That was her answer. That was always her answer. I was 28 when it happened. It was a Sunday, a rare weekend when I wasn't working. They invited me over for dinner, which usually meant reheated lasagna and forced small talk. We were sitting at the table, plates half eaten. The air thick with some secret they were clearly eager to spill. And then my dad, in his typical monotone voice, said it. "We signed the papers this morning. Rachel will be moving in permanently. We transferred the deed to her." At first, I thought he meant something temporary, like she was house-sitting, or just staying a while longer. But no, they had given her the house, the one I grew up in, the one with the scratch marks on the bedroom door from the dog I lost when I was 14, the one my dad helped paint, the one that still had my initials carved under the kitchen counter. I stared at them. I don't even remember putting down my fork. I just remember the cold numbness spreading through my chest, like water seeping into a crack in the pavement. "Why?" I asked. My mother's tone was matter of fact. Rachel needs stability. She's going to be starting her own business soon. She needs a home base. You're already on your feet. I could have screamed. I could have broken something. But I didn't, because I realized something right then and there. They didn't think I deserved anything, not even anger. They expected me to smile, nod, be the good one, the responsible one. Instead, I got up from the table and walked out. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. For days, I couldn't sleep. Not because of sadness, but because of rage. The kind that clings to your bones and infects your dreams. I kept thinking about that house. My house. I thought about how they had rewritten the story. Edited me out like a bad scene. I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. I wanted to let it go. I really did. But then I saw a photo on Rachel's Instagram. Her standing in front of the house, key in hand, smiling like she'd earned it. Caption, "Home sweet home, house with garden sparkles, #blessed." That was it. That was the final crack in the dam. If they wanted to treat her like their daughter and treat me like a stranger, then I would act like one. A stranger who had nothing left to lose and everything to take back. This was no longer about a house. This was about being erased. I started planning the next step, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Some people go no contact. I went surgical. They wanted Rachel to have the house? Fine. Let's see what happens when you build a future on stolen ground. I think there's a point in grief, because that's what betrayal is, really, where the pain calcifies. It stops being a wound and becomes something harder, sharper. A weapon. I wasn't interested in lashing out randomly. I wanted precision. My plan started not with destruction, but with research. Rachel, as ever, lived online. Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, even some lifestyle blog where she posted motivational content with captions like, "Embrace your path, even if others pave it for you dizzy." I nearly laughed myself into a migraine. From her posts, I pieced together her latest endeavor. She was opening a boutique wellness studio. Yoga, crystals, overpriced matcha. Basically the kind of place that thrives in upper-middle-class neighborhoods and dies fast if you have to pay real rent. She was turning my house into a business. That was the angle. Because you see, when you turn a residence into a commercial enterprise, a lot of things change. Zoning, taxes, insurance, and local permits. The very foundations of your little dream start to rot the moment they're not built legally. And she had no idea. So I did what they never expected me to do. I got smart. It's funny. All those years of being ignored, of quietly listening from the sidelines while my parents bragged about Rachel or scolded me for not being ambitious enough. They actually trained me for this. While they were celebrating her Instagram followers, I was learning how to quietly document, organize, and prepare. I started collecting every post, flyer, digital receipt, and mention of her business. I printed things, time-stamped screenshots, even called the local zoning office, pretending to be a concerned neighbor asking questions about property usage. Turns out, she hadn't applied for a single permit. Not one. She had repainted the living room, installed floor-to-ceiling mirrors, ordered studio signage, and posted her first-class schedule online. But on paper, it was still just a single-family residence. Even better, the area had strict residential zoning laws. You couldn't even sell lemonade without a permit in that neighborhood. It wasn't enough to rat her out. That would have been satisfying for maybe 5 minutes. But I didn't want the city shutting her down and my parents swooping in to rescue her with more of what they stole from me. I wanted her to crash. So I reached out to a local parenting Facebook group under a fake profile. Pitched myself as a neighbor concerned about an unlicensed wellness studio operating near a school zone. They ate it up. Safety is a magic word in suburban politics. That group was like lighting a match in dry grass. 3 days later, someone filed a formal complaint. A week later, a city inspector showed up on her doorstep during a paid session she was hosting. The fallout was immediate. Cease and desist notice, temporary closure, and a fine she couldn't afford. All of it documented. All of it public. It didn't take long before I got a call. First my mom, then my dad, then, finally, Rachel herself. The message was the same. We need to talk. They weren't angry, not at first. They were confused. They didn't understand how someone could have found out. My mom was borderline frantic. "You don't understand what she's trying to build," she said, voice high-pitched and desperate. "We were just trying to help her get started." Get started? They gave her my future and called a head start. I stayed calm. I told them it was unfortunate, but maybe they should have checked the zoning codes. Maybe she should have followed the law. Rachel was sobbing. "They're threatening to take the house." I didn't know this was supposed to be safe. Safe, like I hadn't needed safety for years. See, when you fail to register a business properly, especially one operating out of a residential address, you often void your homeowner's insurance policy. I found out through a contact I'd made, an old coworker from my HVAC job who'd moved into real estate and knew someone in property law. Rachel's business renovations weren't just out of pocket. They violated her policy's coverage terms. A week after the inspection, her insurer dropped her. She couldn't cover the new premiums. And then came the tax reassessment. Because guess what? If you claim your house as a business but don't file it that way, the state gets very, very interested in the discrepancy. It snowballed. They got hit with back taxes, business fines, permit penalties, and a potential lien. And then, like a cherry on top of a very bitter sundae, I anonymously tipped off a local news outlet that had done a puff piece on young entrepreneurs revitalizing local neighborhoods. The story ran, "Unlicensed wellness studio faces legal action after community complaints." Rachel's photo, one she posted publicly, was right there on the page. They tried to sell the house. But in order to sell it, they had to get the property reappraised, repair the zoning violations, and pay the fines. Rachel was broke. My parents were too proud to admit they were out of money, but I know they refinanced their own house to help cover the costs. I saw the title transfer records. It's all public info, if you know where to look. They couldn't find a buyer. Nobody wants to buy a house with a reputation problem, and now it had one. And just like that, my childhood home became their albatross, a rotting, overpriced reminder of what happens when you invest everything in the wrong person. I didn't gloat, not out loud. I kept working. I moved into a better apartment, started taking classes again part-time. HVAC wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and I was good at it. One evening, maybe 3 months after it all blew up, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. Inside was a photo of the house, taken years ago, back when we still had a dog and Christmas lights and laughter. On the back, she wrote, "We didn't realize what we were doing until it was too late. I hope one day you'll come home." I didn't respond, because I had finally accepted the truth. That house was never my home.